Jon Jones is making his way back to the UFC. We're joined by Crystal Marie from the Fumble, Jason Rubin. We're going to discuss what it means for the UFC, what it means for Jon Jones, what he has to do to change it. But don't be alarmed. We're going to change sets in 3, 2, 1.
It's about to get real exciting because we are talking Jon Jones. Jon Bones Jones.
Jon Bones Jones.
Quite a nickname.
Yes, so we know Jon Bones Jones is making his way back to the UFC. He was actually reinstated. When was it? Last Friday. Yes. So he responded in a cool way, which I'm sure you guys will throw up.
Is that what you called it? Cool? You
it was
would consider
cool.
that happy dance cool?
I think I could have responded better, but I'm not Jon Bones Jones, and I don't think he should be dancing just yet until he's firmly reinstated in and acting right. That's what I mean.
A little premature dance.
That's what I said. That's why I said he's dancing before.
Jason, what did you think of the dancing?
Do I like Jon Jones the person? No. But Jon Jones the dancer? Sure. Let him dance. Let him
Should
dance.
we see the dance?
Yes.
A lot of talk about this dance.
We should see the dance.
Let's look at the dance.
Do you not like the dance?
I don't love the dance. Again,
Or do you not just
Francis,
just not
I agree
love
with you.
Jon
It's not
Bones?
time to dance yet,
Yeah,
Jon.
Not yet.
It's time to get to work.
Who
Jon.
should really be dancing is Dana White, because he knows,
He's dancing all the way to the goddamn bank.
Exactly,
Yeah,
that's what we're saying. So we know that with Jon Bones Jones coming back, the one thing everyone's going to be talking about is Jon Jones versus Cormier, which is bound to happen, going to happen, and it's going to be the one that everyone's waiting to see, because many people think that Cormier is not worthy of his title right now. So they're looking to see Jon Jones come back, fight him, and basically attempt to retain the title. So Dana White will be delighted about this because he knows that the UFC needs Jon Jones. That's the bottom line. I don't agree with what I would say the punishment or as much of what Jon Jones does on his own outside of it. I think he definitely has to be held accountable, but he said all the right things. Now he needs to walk the walk and not dance too early.
And Cormier is coming off of a big win.
Yes.
So it's an exciting fight. It's a fight that everyone wants to see. It's something that Cormier's wanted for a long time, and he's been very outspoken about it. But is he coming back a little too soon? Do you think the punishment was fair? I mean, you've got Nick Diaz, who's out for till he's 85 for smoking weed, which smoking weed doesn't really do any harm to anyone. It's not a PED. Yes, it was his billionth time doing it. But I mean, drunk driving?
I know. I had this talking point on our channel, and I was backed up, but also held against my word on this, because I have two problems with Nick Diaz. One, he does not give a shit about authority. I don't care, whether it's weed, whether he's taking steroids, whether he's taking coke, whatever. He just doesn't care about that law. And while that law's in place, he doesn't abide to it. Now, don't get me wrong. I completely agree with what you're saying about Jon Jones, and he should have been held accountable for that. Whether either the law gets changed about weed in UFC, and if it doesn't, then you just don't do it. It's his livelihood that he's putting at risk by continuing to do that. So that's what my perspective was. I don't hold as much sympathy as some people did for Nick Diaz. I do think it's a harsh punishment, but the guy just continuously broke that rule.
Right. I agree that, he knew the rules. They were in place. If you don't want to follow the rules, then don't fight for the UFC.
Yes, exactly.
Do I think that fighters should be tested for marijuana? Absolutely not.
Nope.
But him smoking weed only affects himself. It doesn't affect anyone else. It's not a performance-enhancing drug. Now, drunk driving, especially when you also did it in 2012, so this is your second time getting behind the wheel when you're drunk, you're putting so many lives in danger. It's not just about Jon Jones.
It was a hit and run as well. He's running away from this.
It's not just about him. It's about everyone else. You're putting other lives in danger. So that's the issue I have with Jon Jones and his punishment versus Nick Diaz and his punishment.
Yeah.
It's hard. I shouldn't say it's unfair. It's hard to compare the two because they're two different situations. You're comparing apples to oranges when you say one for smoking weed and one for drunk driving. Now, Jon Jones did serve his punishment, and technically he gets reinstated, as he should be according to the rules. If we're going to play by the rules of you sign your name on the dotted line, the contract with the UFC, and you have to abide by them. It's not like Jon Jones has done anything wrong since it's happened. I know he's done it twice. I'm not a huge fan of what Jon Jones does off the octagon. Or in the, outside. I was thinking off the field, outside the octagon. But now that he's back, the UFC it's a dream for them, because you do have the Cormier storyline.
Yeah.
Everything that's happened for him is now going to be in the past. He's going to be held to that every single time he fights. every time you're going to see the headline, Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier, should he be back? And that's what they want. It stirs controversy, makes the UFC even more interesting to watch because you have, I like in the matchup between Cormier and Jones, you get that, you know, good guy versus evil. And as I always mentioned, sports needs villains. It's always a necessity to sports. James Harden to the NBA, in a way, a villain. At least not like getting into drunk driving stuff. Jon Jones, a villain. It makes the sport more compelling and more watchable.
Especially a sport where they're beating the shit out of each other.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. So in that transition, though, you're talking about how much the UFC is going to benefit, but it won't go towards all those lower card fighters who, according to recent reports, don't make that much money if they lose the fight. Now, they put their body, their lives, a lot of time at risk because it's a brutal sport, but they don't get, well, they, according to reports, they don't make that much money from it after they pay out all their expenses if they don't win. Correct? Incorrect? Wrong?
Think even
right?
if they
Handsome?
do, I think even if, handsome, definitely. I think even if they do win, I don't think it's enough, in my opinion, for how much they're putting into the training and dietary needs and just things of that nature, you know, equipment. How much are they really making at the end of the day?
Well,
how much do they walk away
two cards,
with?
Jason. Show me the cards.
So Miles Jury released on his own, it's like a blog that he created for this, just to show the expense reports for it. And a lot of UFC fighters, not named Jon Jones, Daniel Cormier, Gustafsson, McGregor, Aldo, that get these sponsorships and these promotions, and of course win their fights, even make more. These guys are bringing about $10,000 to $20,000 depending on win or loss. So we have the expense report. So a fighter loses and earns about $10,000. Now he claims it's $1,000 for his team, $2,000 for management, taxes. Look, at least like the rest of working America, their taxes are getting ripped out of their paychecks. Medicals, which surprisingly is so low, coaching and whatever miscellaneous means, $8,500. So they're only pocketing about $1,500 for a fight if they do that 3 times a year. If they get those fights 3 times a year.
And how long do they have to train for each fight usually?
But then the good. Well, training for a fight, it depends. We've seen, what was it? It wasn't Cormier. I forgot who it was that on 1 week's notice got like up and took a fight. It just depends on where they are in their training for the next fight. If they feel like, oh, that's an opponent that I'll match up against, and I don't need to change too much of my routine right now. I'm already in this kind of shape. Then they'll take it. I've always felt it's anywhere between 12 to 16 weeks of proper training start to finish, and that is not just because I've seen Rocky. Yeah,
I was going to say that. 12,000 minutes. What is it?
Nice. Well, you've got a lot of former UFC stars like Tito Ortiz, Rampage Jackson. When they left and they went to Bellator, they spoke very openly about how they felt they were very mistreated with the UFC and how they didn't get paid enough and how at times it was difficult for them to keep food on the table for their families because they felt that, you know, the head honchos at the UFC were the only ones really able to have, like, you know, padding for their pockets. But I think now that there are other people trying to compete with the UFC, that it might actually help these UFC fighters in a way, because now there are competitors. So now there is a chance for like the Conor McGregors, you know, like the really big names in the UFCs to be persuaded to maybe go somewhere else if they're not being taken care of. And I think that is why Dana White takes such good care of the big names. Like Ronda Rousey, I mean, he's shouting her out on his social media maybe 5 times a day. And she's pretty much the face of the UFC right now. But it's the lower tier fighters who really aren't being taken care of. And it's not really fair.
And you look at that expense report. I'd love to see the expense report from Ronda Rousey or Jon Jones.
Because don't forget, Rousey doesn't make too much per fight either.
No,
it's the sponsorships that come with it. And of course, when you are paraded around like Dana White does. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I think it's great that she's become the face of the UFC, especially as a female athlete. I think that's amazing that when you look at it compared to at least the male, if you were to put Ronda Rousey on a picture of her and a picture of any other UFC fighter, right? And you showed it around an office of 100 people, my guess is that most people are going to be like, that's Ronda Rousey. I have no idea who Conor McGregor is. You can probably put their names underneath it, and they'd still be like, I still have no idea.
But the UFC has really created such an incredible name for itself these past few years, especially. It's a lot of people have been saying that it is starting to go toe-to-toe with boxing.
Product-wise, yes. Money-wise,
no, it's still not going to. Well, the problem is, as you just mentioned, it's the amount of sponsorships that are attached to boxing. Like, that is almost so hard to compete with. Don't get me wrong. I think 10, 15 years from now, we'll be having this conversation. It'll be a different story. I think at the rate that the UFC is growing with the rivalries that you have, I don't think boxing is going to be able to compete unless they continue to promote these rivalries. Like Mayweather and Pacquiao, we see the significance of that money. I don't think UFC will make that money that made in the next 4, 5, 6 years, because that was a rivalry. But now in boxing, as we mentioned, from a boxing standpoint, you need that villain, which I'm talking about, that Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. But is that going to be enough to continue to keep boxing at the level that people want it to be? Or is you're going to get UFC taken over with your Aldo McGregors, with your Jon Jones and Cormier, with watching Ronda Rousey and trying to see who can ever try and compete with her?
From weight class to weight class, the UFC has a better product.
Yes.
You get more heroes and villains to root for. In boxing, you have Canelo and Cotto, and that is it.
Right, and boxing, if you've been following a lot of the top boxing matches these past couple years, they haven't been that exciting. They're not. There's not enough, Gennady Golovkins in the world. Now that Mayweather is retiring, whatever it is that he's doing right now, not that his past couple fights have been all that exciting anyways, but again, he's like the villain of boxing. People love that he is undefeated, so a lot of people that don't like him wanted to see him get defeated. But it hasn't really been that exciting.
No.
And I'm very much looking forward to Cotto and Canelo at the end of this year. Or what is it, November?
November, right before Thanksgiving.
So that's exciting. But other than that, I wasn't really looking forward to anything unless it was Gennady Golovkin. So we need more Golovkins in boxing, and I think that's why people are so excited to watch the UFC versus boxing now, because I watch every single matchup for every UFC when I do decide to watch, because it is so fucking exciting. They're hitting people with their knees, their toes, their elbows, their fucking ears, anything, any body part you have, you're using in the UFC. So it is exciting, and there's no way, unless it's like a hug fest, which is very rare in the UFC, there isn't a lot of that, but in boxing you can dodge your opponent a lot easier than in the UFC, in MMA.
Like, because boxing, I think, has more of a niche audience. So like we and Jason talk about this a lot. Like Mayweather, I enjoy still watching him because of the art of how he performs. Like he's impossible to hit at times, and I appreciate watching that, but not everyone will appreciate that, as you've seen with the uproar between Pacquiao and Mayweather. But from someone who enjoys watching fighting, there is a lot of art to MMA, especially UFC as well. But you're going to get more of the neutral people who just want to come in and see people blood, guts, and gore, and people get hit in UFC than you are in boxing, especially with the lack of exciting fights that we see. Now, you do have the one-offs, like Canelo and Cotto will be an exciting fight. That will be two fighters who are going out to try and knock each other out. Gennady Golovkin is fearless. He'll take on anyone. Those are the fighters that boxing need in order to stay ahead of the game, I think.
There's not a lot of them left, unfortunately.
No, especially when you look on the undercard. Like, and I'm a huge boxing enthusiast, and I watch undercard fights in boxing, and those are the ones that usually give you your telltale sign of what is up and coming. And unfortunately, flyweight boxers that are exciting to watch do not sell pay-per-view buys. They do not make for compelling fights, because at one point you had the heavyweights. You had Mike Tyson, you had Lennox Lewis, you had all these guys
Heavyweight
that were, week in and week out, you had enough storylines to watch for boxing. And now, unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where a super flyweight championship belt is pretty boring to the average viewer. A flyweight championship belt in the UFC is pretty damn exciting when they're running around the cage and dropping, like, not, I was going to say, a terrible comparison to Hogan leg drops, but in real life.
And UFC has gotten really good at really hyping up their fights.
Yes, they have.
With Conor McGregor, I mean,
that was a huge fight.
He was great at him. He's such a great personality himself that as much as you want to hate the guy at times because he's so goddamn cocky, you still kind of root for him because you're like, God, you really have to be something to have that level of confidence.
And that guy is a sharp dresser.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? That's the main point right there. But the last point I'll make.
He needs to let go of the man bun, though. A man bun okay.
No man buns.
Great.
No man buns on the panel. It's a great panel.
I've been anti-man bun for a year and a half.
I was rooting for him until I saw his highlights, and I noticed that he occasionally rocks a man bun.
Right.
And that bothered me. That's all it takes is a man bun.
What do you guys think? Do you think that Jon Jones has a lot to prove now that he's coming back to UFC? Are you looking forward to him fighting Daniel Cormier? What do you think about the pay towards the UFC fighters? Do you think they're underpaid? Check out Crystal over at the Fumble, a fantastic YouTube channel. She's been great on the panel today. Few shots fired here and there, but that's all good. We take it in good.
All love.
Yeah, it's all love. We fire shots back at each other all the time, so we're used to it.
I'm glad I fit in.